Welcome in, everyone.
Hello, everybody.
This is Everything Sucks, Let's Fix It, episode 22. My name is Ben Mayer.
My name is Anthony Buono.
Today is October 31st, Halloween,
Happy Halloween.
2023. Should we have dressed up?
That would have been funnier, but
Yeah.
you know what?
No.
Too much effort.
Exactly. Yeah, we're busy enough as is. We're recording on Halloween. I feel like that's something.
That is something.
Yeah.
That is something.
That's
That's how
really
much we
something.
care about you people.
Yeah, so much. All of you random nameless people. Cool. We have a lot to talk about. Very interesting, nerdy deep dive that will be fun to get into. But first, we have congressional drama.
We have
That
a
we have to
Speaker
cover.
of the House, people. It is finally here. We finally have a Speaker of the House. The Republicans have somehow pulled themselves together and voted in Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House in a unanimous vote. This is the first time since, I believe, 2011 or 2013, somewhere around there, where a Speaker of the House has been voted in unanimously by the Republican Party with John Boehner for the first time. Mike Johnson, guy comes out of nowhere. I'll go into him in a second, but first, I kind of want to talk about what the hell happened to Tom Emmer. So Tom Emmer was like the third in line to the crown, right? You had Kevin McCarthy, you had Steve Scalise, and then you had Tom Emmer. These were like the Republican leaders, you know? So it was very natural for everyone to say, okay, you didn't like McCarthy, you didn't like Scalise, we gave you Jim Jordan, you didn't like Jim Jordan, let's give you Tom Emmer next. And then Tom Emmer becomes the speaker designate. He's voted in by the Republican conference to become the speaker, but there's like 22, 26 holdouts that just are never going to support him. Then Donald Trump comes out, tweets that he's never going to support Tom Emmer, and in the next couple hours, Tom Emmer just drops out of the race entirely. Didn't even last a day. And
This happened in the middle of our last recording session.
yeah, I had to come in the middle of the recording sessions. I'm like, Ben, dude, like he was in a work meeting and I came in. I'm like, dude, Tom Emmer's is out. Like the whole thing that we just recorded is now useless because it's not even relevant anymore. It moved too fast. But now Tom Emmer's gone. And I want to kind of give some insight into why Tom Emmer's gone. Because the truth is he's gone because he was not radical enough for the far right. And here is just one glimpse of an example. This is a quote from Representative Rick Allen from Georgia. This is his quote. Here is what I said. I said, Jesus spelled out exactly what marriage looks like. I basically shared with him my thoughts on many votes he's taken. And you know, I don't criticize anybody for votes they take. But as far as for me voting for the leader of our conference, that's a difference maker. I told him it wasn't between he and I. It was between he and the teachings of Jesus Christ. Now, this is in reference to Tom Emmer's support of gay marriage and his votes for the Defense of Marriage Act, which codified same-sex marriage into law, like, you know, to protect it from a Supreme Court overruling of the Obergefell decision. So this guy was like, I'm not going to make you speaker because you like gay people too much. You can't make this stuff up, dude.
Yeah, it's brutal.
No, you just can't make it up. I mean,
It upsets me that it went through, that it worked. Because on previous discussions, we've said like the more quote unquote moderate wing of the Republican Party doesn't want to reward the bad behavior of this populist right wing and give them a speaker. And that is exactly what happened. Scalise dropped out because of Jordan. Emmer dropped out, and they replaced him with Mike Johnson.
yeah, and it's they're rewarding bad behavior. You're just going to see this type of stuff more often now because now all the right wingers are like, oh my God, wait a second, Matt Gaetz was right all along. You know, it's like, wait a second, everyone's scratching their head, being like, we were all laughing at Matt Gaetz, but Matt Gaetz actually got to basically decide who the next Speaker of the House was because he was such an asshole. You know, and so what is that encourages everyone to be an asshole. So this is not going to bode well for the future of the House of Representatives as an institution. It's going to be a nightmare. And it's only going to get worse if we keep letting stuff like this fly. Obviously, people also thought that Tom Emmer was so much of a swamp guy. He was definitely going to support Ukraine aid. He was been in Congress for a long time. Like, you know, he's been around he's in the leadership positions. He's nosying up to all the big donors. That's like the right wing's vibe of this guy. So they go with Mike Johnson instead. And so who is Mike Johnson? He has been in office for only 6 years, which is making him the Speaker of the House with the shortest resume in about 100 years. So that's a pretty big deal. They're electing a newbie of newbies here.
Yeah.
6 years in the House of Representatives is nothing. Now, people say that's great. You know, I talked to some Republicans and they're like, I love that. I love that he's not involved because the people who are involved are the problem. That's a bad mindset because that means you don't know how anything works.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's never been the chairman of a committee. He's never had any leadership positions ever.
But it does follow the hard right.
Oh, of course.
Right? It is exactly what they want. They want someone who doesn't belong.
Right. It follows perfectly with their brand. They want the inexperienced because the experience is the problem. Right? Well, let's see how far that takes them.
Yeah.
What's notable about Mike Johnson is he's not in the Freedom Caucus. He is as far right as the Freedom Caucus, and he actually has the exact same voting record as Jim Jordan. Like the exact same voting record. It's like one and the same.
Wow.
Which is so funny to me. All these moderate Republicans like Mike Lawler over in New York. Are you serious, dude? You said Jim Jordan was too far right, but Mike Johnson isn't? They have the exact same voting record.
Did Lawler say that?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, no. What do you mean did he say that? He didn't vote
about
for Jim
Jordan.
Well, he didn't vote for Jim Jordan.
Oh. See, I don't think that's what I mean. I think the reason that Johnson went through, and we talked about this a little bit on the last podcast, is he just didn't bully people as much. He didn't tell all of the constituents of the people who didn't vote for him, call their offices relentlessly. He didn't threaten them with primarying. Mike Johnson is just a guy, which is kind of why he's also able to kind of float into this position like this.
Yes,
I think.
I totally agree with you, but that's my problem. Like they weren't making these decisions based off policy.
Oh yeah,
they were only making these decisions based off vibes.
Yeah,
it's like it makes no sense to me. Like if I were to want to pick who I want to be my leader, I'm going to look at the things they support and say, okay, do I agree with you? Yes or no? These guys are like, are you gonna be mean to me? Are you gonna bully me? Yeah, you're gonna bully me. I'm not gonna vote for you if you're gonna bully me. That's not nice.
Yeah.
What is this? This is like kindergarten level politics here.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating.
It's kindergarten level, but it's also started by the right wing because there is an implicit expectation that once the conference chooses a speaker behind closed doors, you unite and you vote for them. Right. So it's their fault for breaking the norm in the first place.
Oh, of course. But it just kind of underlines this massive point is like, there really is no moderate Republican. At the end of the day, they're all going to vote for a guy like Mike Johnson.
Exactly.
Right. There really is no moderate Republican at that point. There is no Republican that should feel, there is no Democrat or independent who votes for a Republican in a Biden seat because they're moderate, because you have to understand that they're going to support leadership that is as far right as the furthest right member of Congress now.
Yeah.
That's where they're at. So what is Mike Johnson? I could say that he's right wing, and I could say that he's a lunatic and all this stuff. I could say all that to you, and you would be right not to believe me if I didn't provide you with evidence. So let's go down some of the major issues, and we can talk about where he's at. So let's start with gay marriage. He calls gay marriages counterfeit legal arrangements. In the mid-2000s, Johnson's anti-gay rhetoric was intense. Now, it is 2004 when he says this, so we'll give him that. But this is his true ideology. He says that he wrote in support of a Louisiana amendment banning same-sex marriage, and this is what he said: homosexual relationships are inherently unnatural, and the studies clearly show that they are ultimately harmful and costly for everybody. Society cannot give its stamp of approval to such a dangerous lifestyle. If we change marriage for this tiny modern minority, we will have to do it for every deviant group. Polygamists, polyamorists, pedophiles, and others will be next in line to claim equal protection. They already are. There will be no legal basis to deny a bisexual the right to marry a partner of each sex or a person to marry his pet. So he's equating gay marriage with marrying your pets. He's collating it. He's equating it to pedophilia. And then he goes even further here in a different statement. He talks about how it's going to be the downfall of democracy if we allow gay marriage. He says the state and its citizens have a compelling interest in preserving the integrity of the marital union by making opposite-sex marriage the exclusive form of family relationships endorsed by the government. Loss of this status will de-emphasize the importance of traditional marriage to society, weaken it, and place our entire democratic system in jeopardy by eroding its foundation.
how is he making this jump?
Dude, I literally have no idea. The guy's crazy. How could you say that? How does gay marriage equal the demise of democracy?
I have no idea.
And it just
No
underscores his whole belief system. He's literally on video saying we need 18th century morality back. What does 18th century morality even mean?
That's 18th century morality is slavery. It's no voting for women. That's ridiculous.
Why? So why is anybody taking him seriously? Is what freaks me out.
Yeah.
Why are we looking at a guy who's like, I want 18th century morality back. I want my woman barefoot, pregnant, in the kitchen with a black guy making me dinner. Why are we looking at that guy and be like, oh, he's our leader now? It's insanity. Why would you say something like that? Why would you say something like that? He goes on to write in a different editorial years later that experts project that homosexual marriage is the dark harbinger of chaos and sexual anarchy that could doom even the strongest republic.
What?
You know what this sounds like to me? This sounds like a teenager who's talking about politics for the first time. And he's like, he read about Rome twice.
Yeah.
And he it's just
To me, this sounds like someone in our Instagram comments.
Oh, true. Oh man, you know what? Maybe those are the guys who are electing speaker behind the scenes. It's the guys in our Instagram comments.
Yeah. Hey, at least they're watching.
Yeah, at least they're watching. That's true, and they're engaging.
Yeah.
So they're the real fools.
Uh-huh.
He voted against the Defense of Marriage Act,
Yeah.
which didn't just protect same-sex marriage. It also protected like interracial marriage.
Really?
Yeah. So
Oh.
I mean, just whack, dude. Just absolutely whack. Okay. So then let's go on about how what's his position on women's rights. This is a quote from him. Do you remember in the late 60s when they invented things like no-fault divorce laws? We invented the sexual revolution, radical feminism. We invented legalized abortion in 1973, where the state sanctioned the killings of the unborn. We know that we're living in a completely amoral society. It's people say, how can a young person go into their school and open fire on their classmates? Because we taught a whole generation, couple generations now, that there is no right and wrong. So I want to break this sentence. I want to break this paragraph down here. So the theme of this is school shootings happen because of radical feminism, the sexual revolution. Sounds like this guy wasn't having a lot of sex. Legalized abortion and no-fault divorce laws. Those things are causing mass shootings and school shootings. That's his.
Well, I think it's more they are eliminating a sense of right and wrong.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, that's the bottom line.
So then that's interesting to me. What is right and wrong about no-fault divorce?
Yeah, they sound like very terrible examples. No-fault divorce, the sexual revolution, radical feminism, legalization of abortion.
And those things are...
I mean, we don't know what's right and wrong.
Right.
Because clearly... Okay, I mean, the biggest one to me, obviously, is radical feminism.
Yeah.
Like, how are you just putting that out there in a sentence where it's assumed that has fallen into the wrong side?
Right.
Right?
Like, what is it about the radical feminism that you're angry about here?
Yeah.
Is it the voting? Is it the going to work?
Yeah. Is it the equal pay?
Yeah. Like, what is it about radical feminism that gets your fucking tighty whities in a knot, dude? Like,
Yeah.
I don't get it.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, radical feminism can go too far, so maybe that's what he could be talking about. But still, it's not like when he just says these in a sentence, I feel like, sure, if you watch Fox News, you read the sentence and it's like, oh, that makes all the sense in the world to me.
That's so true.
Right? But otherwise, you read it and it's like, I'm not sure what he's getting at because it just doesn't make sense.
Like an independent reading this would be like, I don't even know what half the words in the sentence mean, right? Like that's so then the one that I really want to focus on for a second here is this no-fault divorce thing. So no-fault divorce is, when any partner of a marriage can say, I don't want to be in this marriage anymore, I'm leaving you. Mm-hmm. So he's against that? Like he's against the concept of no-fault divorce?
Yeah.
No-fault divorce was super important for the liberation of women because women were stuck in abusive, violent, scary, financially crippling marriages.
Yeah.
They didn't have the opportunity to leave, right? So with no-fault divorce, you now gave those women a way out of bad marriages. And also, it's just better for everybody if they're able to say, you know what, this isn't a working arrangement for my life anymore. I want to change. Mm-hmm. It's about, liberating yourself. And no-fault divorce has been attacked by Republican politicians lately.
Yeah.
The Texas Republican Party, in its 2022 party platform, actually proposes to rescind the unilateral no-fault divorce laws and support covenant marriages, and to pass legislation extending the period of time in which a divorce may occur to 6 months after the date of filing a divorce. So
I've heard this from a lot of Republicans, I think, including presidential candidates like Vivek.
You have?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because the idea is there's tons of studies that show that children who grow up without a man in the house either are more likely to do drugs, they perform worse in school, they are more likely to be imprisoned at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to change the laws to make it harder for a man to leave the home. But what they propose is, so this is proposing like trapping women or men in marriages that they don't want.
Yes.
Right, to do that, which is I think very problematic.
It's probably worse for the kid, right? I mean, if we want to,
Yes.
if we're talking about protecting the kid, do you want to be in a household where your mom and dad are fighting all the time? Absolutely not. That's
No.
way worse.
Exactly. I know plenty of people just anecdotally that are glad that their parents got divorced because they couldn't imagine their parents staying together.
Exactly.
But also, one of the iterations of this idea is to stop incentivizing single motherhood by giving them tax breaks or welfare.
Yeah, sure.
And that's wild to me.
Wild.
Because I think it completely, again, it's like, okay, you can get out of this relationship that you don't like or that is harmful to you, but if you do, we're not going to help you. Right?
Which is
like,
crazy.
even though you're leaving yourself in what is probably a worse financial situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, you have Republican senators right now, J.D. Vance, that were, on the campaign trail saying, like, some women will have to put up with a little bit of abuse in marriages, or like will have to work through it. And like, that's kind of like, it's just insane to me that we're talking about no fault divorce in 2023.
Yeah.
Right. It's like,
that is crazy.
It's just, it's such a radical shift back to the past. Like, it's such a regressive reactionary force right now.
Yeah.
So now let's go on to what he talks about abortion. He supports a national abortion ban starting at 20 weeks, but he indicates that life begins at conception. So when Republicans are going out saying that, oh, I support a 20-week abortion ban nationwide, if they also think that life begins at conception and holds that belief, what would make them stop at 20 weeks if they had full unilateral power? Why would they do that? Mm-hmm. If they truly believe that the life begins right after conception and everything after that is murder, why would they allow a 7-week abortion? Why would they do that? If that's truly your belief that it's murder, they wouldn't be doing that. Mm-hmm. They'll take as much as they can get.
So you're saying they're only saying this as a political
Yeah, move. They're only saying the 20-week because it's what they can say out loud without getting absolutely ran over in the voting booth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But he has also said plenty of times that abortion is a sin and all that, So he also makes the weirdest argument for being anti-abortion, saying that we need more workers to prop up Social Security and Medicare. So the less abortions will help us keep these programs solvent.
See, I've heard ideas like this too.
Oh, really?
Not just about programs like this solvent, but it's like our economy is based on a population that consistently grows. So we need to make it harder for people not to have children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, luckily in the U.S. we have a birth rate of like 1.6. Replacement is 2.1. 1.6 is like one of the best in the developed world.
Yeah.
China is at like 1.1, maybe even less than that, because if you believe their stats, I don't know. But again, it's one of those things where you're like, ugh.
It's like, this is what we should change the system around.
Yeah.
Not what we should change people's behavior to conform to.
And it's like, we've already talked about how to keep Social Security and Medicare solvent. You raise taxes. You raise taxes on rich people to keep Medicare and Social Security solvent. Yeah. You eliminate the cap at $160,000 on your FICA taxes, and bam, Social Security is solvent for like 90-something, 70 years or something. Okay? That's the answer. It's not to force women to have more babies.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane to me, dude.
That is crazy.
It's like, it's just nuts. And then he also, obviously, he's not just against abortion. He's also against contraception. Johnson also opposed the Right to Contraception Act that the House approved last year before the Republicans gained control. So he wants women to not at all be able to control their reproductive cycle at all.
Yeah.
Because it's the will of God. So,
Ugh.
God damn, dude. Like, I'm a kind of religious guy. Like, I am, you know? Like, I read the Bible, unironically. This is just nuts. You know, there's no, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Then let's go over to what he talks about Social Security. So besides forcing women to have babies that they don't want, he has other plans on how to save Social Security. During his tenure as the Republican Study Committee Study Committee between 2019 and 2021, Representative Mike Johnson helped craft budget resolutions that called for a $2 trillion cut in Medicare and a $3 trillion cut in Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act and a $750 billion cut in Social Security. This, over the course of the next couple decades out to 2091, this results in a 31% cut in overall spending for these programs. How do you create this 31% cut? Three major things. You raise the retirement age from 67 to 69. You reduce benefits for above average earners, which sounds okay, right? I read that one. Reduce benefits for above average earners. All right, that sounds all right. Eliminating the cost living adjustments for those with higher incomes and using a chain-weighted inflation index for those who qualify for cost of living. So reducing the cost of living increases. All of that initially, you're like, okay, wait. Retirement age going up is bad, but reducing benefits for the above average earners, that sounds okay. And the article that I got this information from says, at a first glance, one might conclude that that's a fine outcome, but the median worker who sees benefits drops to 77% of current law had career average earnings of $58,000 in 2022. That's the person that they're talking about that's going to have benefit cuts.
Oh.
And then when they talk about high earners who sees benefits drop to 40% of current law, those people earn $94,000 a year. Those are not rich people.
No.
Those are not high income people.
That is smack dab in the middle.
That is smack dab in the middle. You want to talk about, let's look at the state of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
What's the average household income in Massachusetts? Probably $70,000. What would you guess?
Yeah, maybe in the state. It's hard from us being in the city. I think the poverty line almost is being a single person in a household at $78,000.
Right. Yeah. So it's nuts to me that that's their solution to Social Security. Again, it's raise the retirement age and cut benefits for people who make under $100,000.
Yeah.
Like, that's their solution. It's a 31% cut to Social Security over the course of 100 years. So the next part that I want to talk about that is not having to do with legislation or how he's going to be as a leader in the House of Representatives. Let's talk about how he's going to be a leader on the campaign trail, because being the Speaker of the House is not just a political process here. It's not just a political thing. It's also you're running the national campaigns for the Republican Party. You have to raise a lot of money. And so far, Mike Johnson has not proved that he's able to raise the money needed. So in 2016, the average House candidate raised $1.7 million. Mike Johnson raised $1.1 million. Wait, what did I say? Did I say that right? The average House candidate raised $1.7 million in 2016. Mike Johnson raised $1.3 million. Okay, in 2022, the average House candidate raised $3 million. Mike Johnson raised $1.3 million. He is 50% below the average House legislature right now in terms of fundraising dollars. That is not going to bode well when now he's the leader of the party, because he doesn't have the connections to make these types of calls that get the money in that McCarthy was able to get in.
Yeah, there's a quote in this article where the reporter had reached out to an advisor of one of the biggest donors to the Republican Party, and the advisor asked about his relationship with Mike Johnson. And the advisor said, Never heard of him. I'm looking him up right now.
God, that's a nightmare.
Yeah.
No, it's a nightmare. So Kevin McCarthy has like this is the type of difference we're talking about here. Kevin McCarthy, cash on hand, has $10 million on hand right now. Steve Scalise, $5.8 million cash on hand right now. Jim Jordan, $8.5 million. Mike Johnson, 1.1. Oh my God, dude, that's so bad.
Yeah.
Kevin McCarthy has been able to raise so much money for the Republicans in the House. Mike Johnson is just not going to be able to pick up that slack.
I mean, we'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah, no, I think he might have a chance. I don't want to indict him on this too soon.
Okay.
Because he's a representative from a small, poor Louisiana district.
That's true.
Right? So he hasn't needed much money to support himself. Now that he's in this role, he's going to be asked to do a lot more fundraising. Maybe he'll still suck at it, but I don't know if this is going to be prescriptive. Although what it means is it's not there on his resume. So there's no reason to be sure that he will be good at it.
Right. And one of the benefits that Kevin McCarthy has was that he was from California.
Yes.
You're from California. You're from a rich state. You have a lot of rich friends. You can make those phone calls. Mike Johnson doesn't have those same friends that can call up. It's just going to be hard. I think it's going to be hard for him to make those friends very quick.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, well, it's the way I think about it. Scalise and McCarthy are going to have to be in there with him, like putting him in front of these faces, in front of these donors, making him network, because they don't want to do all of the fundraising work that a speaker has to do if they're not the speaker.
Oh, no.
Right? Of course not.
No.
But
and people aren't even going to give Kevin McCarthy that much money if he's not going to be the speaker.
Yes.
It's like it's also buying access. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's also like, buying friends with the Speaker of the House.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think Johnson won't be so terrible.
I agree.
In his role.
I agree. His numbers will definitely go up.
No, but the idea is that like a good fundraising speaker helps the whole conference and like makes it easier for more of the representatives in the conference to solicit donations from these people. So the question is, does Johnson help with that? And we'll have to see.
That's going to be interesting because he just doesn't have the network yet. So that's Mike Johnson, very religious, very fundamentalist guy. He comes from the Christian right wing. He is not a big fundraiser, but we'll see if he can change on that. And now all of these guys, Mike Lawler from New York, he's being tied to the furthest right elements of the Republican Party, and it's going to make it a lot harder for these frontline Republicans to win.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the Q3 GDP growth.
Yeah.
Wow.
We've been looking forward to this one for a while, right?
Yeah, we've been kind of like even like since August, we've been talking about Q3 looks really good.
Yeah.
And we finally got the numbers, and it is good. We saw a 4.9% GDP growth in Q3. Yeah. Which is honestly just blockbuster numbers. I mean, it really is. The month before, the quarter before was 2%. The quarter before that was around 2%. The quarter before that was around 2.3%. Now up to 4.9% growth. That's just banging.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge.
Most of the growth is from the service sector, then non-durable and durable goods. But what I'm really excited about here is the GDP breakdown, right? So GDP is made up of spending, imports minus your exports, your private investments, government spending. Okay, that's what makes up GDP. We saw government spending make up 0.8% of the overall 4.9%, right? So 0.8% was because of government spending, 0.7% was because of exports, 1.3% was because of investments, which is awesome, and then banging is 2.7%, which is because of consumer spending, which means people have the money and they have the capacity to put money back into the economy, which is really, really awesome to see. I have reasons to believe that might not last.
I agree.
But there is really good news coming out of here. And before I get to the bad news, I just want to talk about how this relates to the rest of the world. Okay, because there is some bad news, and we'll get to that. But I want to talk about how this relates to everything else. So let's compare to what happened in the EU in financial Q3. The European Union GDP fell 0.1%. So while the United States is growing at 5%, Europe contracted 0.1%. Now, some nations grew. France grew 0.1%, Spain 0.3%, Belgium 0.5%. But Germany, Austria, Portugal, Ireland, Estonia, Lithuania, a bunch of others contracted. And it's just crazy to me that the West is on two separate economic realities right now. Two very separate economic realities. China. What are you going to say?
Well, I guess this goes into the bigger picture of the consumer spending in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
There was recently an announcement that for the first time the EU has paused its interest rates rising. So the way I'm seeing this is consumer spending is up in the U.S. because people are more confident in the economy. We've had rates paused for a while, right? They're a little bit less scared about a recession. They're a little bit more confident in us hitting that soft landing. And at this point, real wages have increased in the past year or 2 years, whatever it is, right? Real wages are not down, which means wages are outpacing inflation.
That's right.
So I think that is something that could explain why the U.S. consumer spending is up over what they have in Europe, where it does still feel shakier.
Right. And that's important to remember, right? We have that real wage increase. Our wages have outpaced inflation over the last year, which is really, really good. But the issue is people haven't felt it. And that's what's a problem, because people still, when they respond to surveys, they say the economy sucks. They say we trust Trump with the economy more than Biden. And it's because consumers they're waiting for prices to come back down, but that doesn't happen. Prices don't go back down. They just stop growing as fast. It's very, very volatile prices that go up and down, up and down, up and down, like oil and food. Most of the time they just go up, and it's about, okay, how fast are they going up? It's very, very, because you have to think about all the input prices that go into each product. All of those things add up to the good.
Well, and just the manufacturers, the producers don't want to lower prices. Once they've seen that they can sell something at a certain price, they're just going to leave it there, right? And when they can, they're going to increase it.
Right. They're going to raise their prices as much as the market will allow them to raise it without getting massive pushback or a decline in sales, right? So now in China, their GDP grew at 4.9% in Q3, which is insane to me that I'm sitting here and I'm saying the United States and China are growing at the same rate.
See, you spin that positively, which it is positive.
Yeah.
Because of how long China's growth has outpaced the United States. But I read that and I am shocked that they are still growing that fast.
It's shocking because we've talked about some of their economic calamities here, where their exports have fallen, their imports have fallen.
Their real estate market is collapsing.
And despite all that, they're still growing at 5%.
It's insane to me. And I wonder about the data. It's so crazy. I don't understand.
I know.
That I wonder how realistic this data can actually be.
I think it's just important to put China in context then, because they have a 5% growth target for the year. So by Q4, they want to hit 5%. And to do that, and so in that number, putting that number in context, that is the lowest Chinese target ever. That's the lowest target they've ever even asked to hit.
Really?
That's the lowest they've ever attempted to hit.
Wow.
So 5% for China is definitely minuscule growth compared to the U.S. because, you can imagine it's harder to go from, 20 to 21 than it is from 1 to 3. You know what I mean? But there are some, and China's growth of 4.9% actually exceeded expectations. Economists projected that it would grow at 4.6%. So China has exceeded expectations in that regard. But there is the Purchasing Managers Index review of October, which is a very important metric, which gives a glimpse into the economic trends before they reflect into economic data. So when the Purchasing Manufacturer Index is this very, very large-scale survey that goes out to numerous business leaders, to inventory holders, to capital investors, and it basically gauges their interest in investing, their interest in purchasing, their interest in expanding. And their index, the PMI, came in at 4.5% this month. It was forecasted to be around 50.2. which means that there was a reduction in what they expected, and there was a reduction in the month over month. Now, the Chinese PMI index has had a little bit of trouble in recent months. In April, it was extremely negative at had negative 5.2% change, falling to 49.2. It rose slightly over the last few months, but October it dropped significantly. Now, what this means is there is genuine fear that there is trouble on the horizon in the Chinese economy by the industry leaders inside of China that are the ones interacting with the economy every day. The United States has its own PMI index, and the United States PMI index is currently at 49. Now you'd say, why? Okay, that's also really bad. We just talked about how China was at 49 and we 49.5, and that's bad. So is the US being at 49 bad? Well, kind of, sort of, because the United States started off at the year at 48.4 PMI. Now we're at 49. So as of year to date, we are seeing a rise in our PMI index, which means that industry leaders are seeing things to be hopeful for in the US economy. It's all about that slope. So this is a really interesting thing that I want to obviously keep following month over month now. And it's just exciting to see the US kind of be the top dog on the economic side that we haven't really seen in a while.
Yeah.
You know?
I agree.
It's really interesting. But now there is some bad news, and let's get to that. So the savings rate has dropped to 3.8% from 5.2% in the last quarter. So we are approaching some of the lowest saving rates that we've had in a very long time. We're approaching saving rates that we had in 2008, which is really, really bad. We do not like to see that. That means that people are consuming more. So when we see that number, right, savings rates falling, that makes a lot of sense as to why our consumer spending was so high, because people are spending the cash that they had on reserves.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to this, we also see a rise in credit card delinquencies. We have credit card delinquencies rising to 2.8% of people with credit cards facing some type of delinquency in the last 30 days.
Yeah.
And so are people overspending?
I think so. And that's why it almost confuses me. I don't know why they're so confident.
I know.
These obviously are, like, we just got these great economic numbers. We just talked in our last episode about how every month the jobs report comes out and it's like, wow, this is fantastic.
Every single time.
So maybe that's it. It also is hard for me to believe that the populace at large is so plugged into those overall numbers and like takes it really into account in their personal behavior.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I tried to dig to see like what this consumer spending is on. I couldn't find it itemized. So I'm hesitant to try to explain or deduce like what this is all going to.
Yeah.
But in general, the fact that people are willing to be draining their savings
right
just to spend right now.
Right. And I will say the credit card delinquencies are kind of almost look like they're adjusting towards like the mean of what credit card delinquencies are normally.
Yes.
So like throughout the 1990s and the early 2000s, credit card delinquencies hovered around 4%. So the fact that we're at 2.9% doesn't necessarily mean we're headed to really bad economic times. It might just mean that we're reverting towards the mean. It might mean that because interest rates have increased to historic highs right now people are having more and more trouble meeting their minimum monthly payments, which makes sense with higher interest rates, right?
Yes.
But that also will eventually lead to less consumption because people are going to have less liquidity.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder, do you think part of this, or I guess that it's probably too late for this to come to effect, but the resuming of student loan payments?
Yes. It's awesome that you mentioned that because in the Bloomberg's article where I was reading, they talked about how the student loan payment will actually reduce consumer spending in the next quarter by 0.3 points alone.
Yeah.
So just the resumption.
I don't know if that's a word.
I like it.
Okay.
Let's make it.
Sure.
Just the resumption of student loan payments will reduce consumer spending by 0.3%, which is pretty wild.
Yeah.
right? That's a lot of consuming power that's just going to leave the economy. Now, is our economy ready for that? That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Because now a lot of money is going to be going towards a non-productive fund here.
Sure.
Right?
I think it's okay.
Right.
Like, I think we're just going to drop back down closer to a 2% quarter. That's what I imagine.
Yeah.
Maybe a 1%.
Maybe in worst case scenario. But I think I kind of agree with you there.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting to watch the credit card delinquency rates because it's interesting because right after 2010, you see a massive decline in credit card delinquencies. And that is perfectly clearly in relation to the dropping of interest rates.
Yeah.
Right? That's when quantitative easing was at its full force. And it's like an exponential decline until 2016. And then when interest rates rise, it goes up again. So that's a really interesting thing that we noticed there. I want to get back into German politics.
Of course you do.
Because there were some elections recently that didn't go great if you don't like the far right, like we don't. And I just want to report a little bit of the results there. So first, I want to talk about two, mainly the state elections of Bavaria and the state elections of Bremen. So in Bavaria, the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, has gained around 5 points in the Bavarian parliament. They've gone from 22 seats to 32 seats, which just sucks because that means they're growing. They are now larger than the Green Party, which was the second largest party in the state.
Wow.
They've now beaten the Green Party.
Yeah, the Green Party and the Social Democratic Party both lost seats.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The AfD, the FDP, the Free Democratic Party, they lost all their seats. They got totally wiped out.
Yeah.
They're a neoliberal classical economics party, and they got totally wiped. So Bavaria has just gone a very, very rightward trend here, which is really crazy. So then you look at Bremen, and over in Bremen, the CDU, the center right, gained 12 seats, and then the AfD gained 9. And the Greens, the left, the SPD, the FDP, they all lost seats. The only ones who are gaining are the center right and the far right. And the far right gained a lot. The far right became the second largest party in the state of Bremen. This is going from the fourth largest party to the second largest party in one election, which is really, they have momentum here.
Yeah.
And this also comes with them polling second in national polling, second to the CDU. And there's a lot of reaction to this. The co-leader of the AfD, her name is Alice Weidel. She said that the results showed that the party had a right to participate in government, and any further exclusion and discrimination would show an undemocratic disregard for voters. So we talked about a couple weeks ago how the firewall was breaking between the CDU and the AfD, and the CDU was working with the AfD for local policy goals. Well, now the AfD is demanding that the CDU don't just work with them locally. They want them to work with them statewide, and they want them to be involved in government. She added that the AfD is no longer a protest party. And if the party comes second in the 2025 elections, which polling currently suggests they will easily take the lead to claim right to be in the government of the part of the country. Unbelievable results from Germany.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And
it's so fast.
It's so fast. I feel like this has really been rising for like only 3 years. Because I feel like 4 years ago, AfD was a joke.
Yeah. Well, what I'm seeing, even just with a quick overview, is they're seizing on anti-immigration rhetoric. And that is especially ramped up, and it's become more prominent issue for people because of all the Ukrainian refugees that have been forced into Germany. And we had German elections 3 years ago when Olaf Scholz became prime minister there, and the SPD gained a lot, the FDP gained a lot, the Greens gained a lot, the CDU dropped a lot, the Alternative for Deutschland lost a lot of support in the most recent German federal elections. And it looks like it's about to be a huge reversal. And that's just really, really scary. And now, why is it so scary?
Why am I so scared of the AFD? Well, here's why. An AFD lawmaker has been arrested for having Nazi symbols. Daniel Halemba, he's 22 years old, the youngest member of Bavarian parliament, actually. So this is, 22 years old. Daniel Halemba, AFD lawmaker. He was a part of an organization called the Teutonia Prague Student Fraternity. So Teutonia, for anyone who doesn't know, is a reference to the Teutonic Order, which was a crusading knights group, which led a crusade into modern-day Lithuania, killed a bunch of pagans, and then kind of brought about the German warrior culture that we think about today.
Huh.
So when you say the Teutonia Prague Society, that's kind of what they're referencing. They're referencing the Teutonic Order, the Teutonic League.
Wow.
Which is some hardcore stuff.
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot about immigration and past racist eugenics language of the 19th century, and they all reference the Teutonic Order and the Teutonic Knights as the pinnacle of human beings and human species.
Wow.
So for this guy to be a part of the Teutonia Prague student fraternity, it says a lot. So he's under investigation on suspicion of incitement and using symbols of unconstitutional organization. Forbidden symbols were discovered at his fraternity, and neighbors have been complaining about calls of Sieg Heil coming from the building. Obviously, the lawmaker has denied all of the allegations, but he has been arrested. So we'll see how that plays out. But thank God Germany has these laws to protect themselves from unconstitutional organizations.
Yeah.
So this stuff can't fly.
We'll see how long.
Right. We'll see how long those last. The second the CDU realizes they'll need the AFD to keep power, maybe they'll change their mind.
Exactly.
You better not. You better not, CDU. Don't fucking do it again. How many times we got to teach you this lesson?
Probably too many times before it happens. I don't know. This seems like a runaway train right now.
It does, right?
Yeah.
And so with the next election coming around, it puts a lot of things up for grabs. It makes the future of NATO very iffy because AFD is very, very anti-NATO. Puts the future of the EU up in the air because AFD is very, very anti-EU.
Yeah.
It puts the future of gay rights, of women's rights up in the air. It puts up in the air the entire German welfare state apparatus. That goes up in the air too because they're fairly libertarian with their economics. What also sucks is that members of German parliaments have immunity. So he needs to be convicted fast.
Yeah.
Because the immunity doesn't begin until the first meeting of the new Bavarian parliament, which isn't for a couple weeks.
Holy cow. This shit is intense.
Otherwise, he'll just be a Nazi in Bavaria, and he'll be going home and screaming Sieg Heil.
Yeah.
So all you guys in our YouTube comments and our Instagram comments, how much more do you need from us to say or show you that the AFD is a Nazi organization? You have your members screaming Sieg Heil in fraternity houses.
See, I don't even know if the people in our comments disagree.
That's scary for me. You don't think maybe they just are Nazis?
Yeah. I think you said in one of our podcasts a while ago that like the new Nazis are gonna come with hearts and rainbows. Right. This is almost a version of that to me. It's like they're not going to come out and say they're Nazis. They're just going to keep pushing and pushing and saying they're not Nazis until you realize that you're one of them.
Yeah. Oh, man. That's good, dude. Jesus Christ. That's scary as hell.
Yeah, I hope not.
All right. Let's go to some good news.
Yes.
What do we got on that union front, baby?
UAW has reached tentative deals with each of the big three, Ford, GM, and Stellantis. This just came in yesterday. Huge deal here.
So exciting.
These strikes have been happening for 6-8 weeks, something like
that.
It's just a huge win for labor overall.
One of the biggest of my lifetime.
Yeah,
easily the biggest of our lifetimes.
I'd say so. I mean, as someone who hasn't paid as much attention, but what results did they get from this? 25% raises over 4.5 years from now, including an 11% raise upon ratification, because the union leaders have agreed to this, but the members still have to vote on it. They'll probably vote with what the leaders have said is good.
I want to pause there for a second.
Yeah.
over this 4.5-year period, workers will get more money in raises than what they've gotten over the last 20 years. Oh, hell yeah.
That's insane.
Sean Fain.
Yeah.
God, we'll sing his praises in a bit. Let's keep
Yeah.
going. What else
Yeah.
did they get?
So a huge part of this was the battle against tiered workers, right? And so that's gone through, which means that the raises that are coming for the lowest level workers in the union are going to be the biggest.
Hell yeah.
Temporary workers who have been working at $16, $17 an hour are going to be raised to upwards of $40 an hour by the end of the contract.
Oh my God.
Speeds up their conversion to full-fledged employees. So that's everything for salary, but it also reinstates the cost of living adjustments that the companies negotiated out of the agreement during the 2008-2009 financial crisis. So these salaries are always going to keep up with inflation, at least from now on, which is huge.
Amazing.
Increased 401k company contributions.
Banging.
Enhanced profit sharing bonuses, which
So
is
banging.
super exciting.
So exciting, because that's what you want. You want your employees to be tied into your company's success.
Totally.
That is the goal here.
Mm-hmm.
And so those profit sharing incentives and those profit sharing bonuses are going to make all the difference into these employees' lives and the employees' feeling of community within your organization.
Yes, absolutely. And their motivation.
Oh, and their motivation.
Do their work. Yeah, they're just going to feel more fulfilled, I think, at least.
Oh, for sure. And there's going to be now a right to strike over plant closures, which used to be barred. You weren't allowed to strike over plant closings down. That wasn't a right you had in these negotiations. Well, now you do.
Yeah, and I feel like that's really exciting because it means that labor is going to have to be part of the discussion
every time
if plants are going to close.
Every time unions are going to be at the table, and that's exactly what we want.
Yes, that is how you balance the market power with the worker power.
Absolutely.
Yeah, put them at the table.
Absolutely.
And then there's a bit of progress on the EV front, which we talked about before, the idea of how are we going to unionize these battery plants in addition to the automaker facilities?
Exactly.
This applies to Ford. We don't know yet for GM and Stellantis, but in the master agreement, a majority of the workers at Ford's battery plant in Marshall, Michigan, or its EV assembly plant in Tennessee, they can submit cards saying they want a union. This is a process known as a card check. And it means that if the majority of the workforce is eventually made up of UAW members,
the contract will apply to them as well. Which now we have the perfect launching point of unionization of the EV plants now, right? Like so fast.
Yeah.
Because it just has to be a card check. This is going to be avoiding the union elections if they can just get a majority of the members to sign the cards.
Yeah.
Which is historically a lot easier than winning union elections. So, I mean, now I want to go into how much I love Sean Fain, okay? Yeah. Because he has just crafted a beautiful strategy. So he comes in. He only won election this year. This is his first year being UAW president, and he's already the most successful UAW president of my life, which is just crazy to think about. And he came into this on the election season saying that he was going to be the strongest advocate possible, that he was going to be a militantly pro-labor, a militant labor leader. And that's exactly what we've seen. And his language also reflects that. And, you know, your actions and what you're able to do for your workers are so incredibly important, but it's also important as a labor leader to send your political message out into the people who aren't in your union and explain to the people who aren't in your union why your union is good for them too. And in a speech he had recently, he had these 3 quotes that I really want to outline here. He said, "A turning point in the class war that's been raging in this country for the past 40 years. That's how he views modern America right now, a class war. And he says that this is the turning point. We are turning the corner. We are sticking it to capital, putting power in the hands of labor. And he says that this war has been raging for 40 years. Nice knock on Ronald Reagan, Sean Fain. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the type of rhetoric we need out in the open. That's the type of language we need from our politicians.
I agree.
That's the type of language we had from Bernie Sanders when he was running for president, but he was never able to get out into the open media market and be exposed to a lot of like regular voters. It was hard for him because he wasn't like a national brand at the time, whereas Joe Biden was, where Joe Biden, he can come out and say stuff like this. And I think he could change a lot of people's minds really fast. If he says something like this, where he says we're in a class war and the UAW has turned the corner on workers' rights, I feel like that would take a lot of liberals and make them way more in support of unions. You know what I mean?
I agree. It's like, even though his actions have kind of been saying that, his rhetoric hasn't been.
His rhetoric is always like...
He's tiptoeing.
He's always tiptoeing. He's always like, I don't have a problem with people making money. He's like, capitalism without competition is exploitation. I like that line when he says it, but you got to be more ferocious with it. You have to say we're in a class war. You have to convince the working class that you're on their side, you know? Because as much as I love your new decisions at the NLRB, as much as I love the judges you're appointing, as much as I love the Inflation Reduction Act and what that does for EV-related jobs and stuff, I love the money that you put in the CHIPS Act for job training. That's great. That's awesome. That's pro-worker stuff. But you have to be able to sell it. And I don't know if he's selling it the way he needs to be selling it, like Sean Fain can sell this.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think he likes his positioning in the middle.
He always does.
Yeah.
He always does.
So he doesn't want to sell it too hard.
Another Sean Fain quote from his speech. He says that this was a call to action to workers everywhere to organize and fight for a better life.
Yeah.
Expanding outside of the UAW family. He's taken it to every worker, no matter where you work. This is a call for you to organize. And I love that mindset. He said these corporations had no idea what was coming for them, and they have no idea what's next. Yeah. And I am so excited by what he announced is next, because, oh boy, does he have plans. Yeah. He announced that the UAW is officially targeting the 20,000 worker factory in Fremont, California.
The Tesla
factory. Fremont, California factory. The Tesla factory.
Yeah.
He's coming for you, Elon. It's about time. Go rewatch our EV episode when we went over Tesla's supply chain and where they produce their cars. I literally said that the UAW should target Fremont, California, and that's exactly what they've done.
Yeah.
Awesome job, Sean Fain. Workers at the Tesla factory at Fremont, California have officially formed an organizational committee to form a union, and the UAW is funding the effort. Oh my God. Oh, it's happening. And he concludes his speech with just an incredible line. He says, when we return to the bargaining table in 2028, it won't just be a big 3, but it'll be a big 5 or even a big 6, indicating that they will not be stopping at Tesla, which is just amazing, because Tesla is the big boogeyman in this whole situation. We've been talking for months on this strike saying, oh man, if they can't get EVs figured out, Tesla's going to lap them.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
But if they're able to unionize Tesla, all that fear goes out the window. And it's just so exciting to think that that could actually happen.
Yeah. It'll be hard, because we've also talked about how good Elon has been at preventing unionization. But what I'm thinking about now is how does he even stop it? Right? Like, especially with the Chemex ruling that we talked about a while back, where if there is any evidence of workers wanting to start a union and the company doing something to squash that union organizing, there's an automatic union election held. So with those kinds of circumstances, right, like, it's hard for me to even fathom a path for the union not to be formed. Yeah. Especially now that Sean Fain has gotten all of this press, all of this attention.
So true.
And he's put this idea out there, right? How are these workers not going to form a union?
Right. He showed the success of a union. He just showed that to all of those 20,000 workers at Fremont, California. If you are one of them, please, you have to see how a union is in your interest. Just to really nail down this point, under the new tentative agreement with the UAW and the Big 3, their benefits plus hourly compensations is estimated to be $88 to $89 an hour. That's their wages plus benefits.
Wow.
At Tesla, it's $45 an hour, wages plus benefits.
That's crazy.
They're making double what you make, dude.
Yeah.
And it's all because they have a union and you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like the fact that these companies have unionized also makes it more okay for Tesla to unionize. Like, they don't have to worry about the same thing now that the big three have worried about,
Right.
that they're going to be falling behind.
Yep.
They're just going to be coming into step with them.
Exactly. So Elon, big boss, is coming in for you. Sean Fain, he's coming. And God, listen, I don't want Sean Fain to run for president in 2028 because I want him to be around at this 2028 bargaining table.
But in 2032.
In 2032, Sean Fain, you better run for president, dude. I don't care if you run as an independent, okay?
Yeah.
You do whatever you want. You are my guy. I love you.
This guy's awesome.
He's fucking the best, dude.
No, it's snowballing, and he is a big part of it. We talked already for next week's deep dive. We've had such a crazy union summer. We want to go a little bit deeper and see what sparked this, what drove it, and we're going to be telling that whole story, which I don't really know any of yet, and I'm really excited to learn about.
Yeah, I don't even know much about it either, and I'm excited. I remember last year, there was like a Striketober thing. Maybe that was 2 years ago, and that was the first time in my life where I was like, do strikes get covered in the media like this frequently? That was the first time I kind of saw that, and the AFL-CIO's response, we'll talk about this next week, but the AFL-CIO's response to that was kind of exciting. They're like, wait a second, our strikes are trending on Twitter? They're like, wait a second, why? And then it was like hashtag Striketober, and it became this thing, and the AFL-CIO was like really shocked. So we'll talk about that next week. Now let's go over to what's going on in Israel right now. So we have some movement on the war front there.
Yeah.
A ground invasion of Gaza has begun.
Yeah, this happened like 3 days ago. We're recording this Tuesday. This happened on Saturday.
Yeah.
I think we reported on this when we recorded last time.
Mm-hmm.
They were preparing for a ground invasion, but the U.S. and other Western allies had been urging Israel to hold off in hopes that they could make a little bit more progress on freeing hostages. The crazy thing is, when Israel finally does go in on Saturday, they completely shut down communications, like cell towers, internet, that the entirety of the Gaza Strip had, so that they couldn't communicate any information to outside of the area, and they couldn't communicate among themselves within Gaza. This meant that people couldn't figure out whether their families were okay, whether their friends were okay. They couldn't call an ambulance if they were affected by one of the airstrikes. In my opinion, a really kind of barbaric war crime-esque thing to do.
Oh yeah, it's gross.
It was terrible. And this is, of course, amongst reports of entire families being wiped out. I was listening to The Daily from the New York Times earlier, and there was an interview with someone who said they had lost 70 family members already in the airstrikes, and that the feeling that you get when that happens is just that your time is kind of coming, that death is inevitable. And that is this horrifying situation that has now evolved in Gaza.
That's insane.
So this happens for 24 hours. Communications are out. Then the good thing that the U.S. does here, at least reports say that the U.S. urges Israel to allow communications to go back up, for internet to be up.
I want to interject for a second there, because before they put the communications back up, they released a video saying how they don't want to kill civilians. How are the people in Gaza supposed to watch the video, guys? You had the internet down.
Yeah.
How did you expect the people of Gaza to watch that video? The answer is that they didn't. It was to appease Western audiences.
Yeah.
It was impossible for the Gazans and the Palestinians to watch the video. So why are you even releasing a video talking about how you don't want to hurt the civilians and you want the people of Gaza to see this message and to move south? You cut off their access to watching it.
Yeah.
You know, you're just lying.
No, they don't. It's becoming pretty clear that they don't care about that. So now what's happening is Israel is looking to divide northern Gaza City from the south to isolate Hamas. So what I've read is the idea of these airstrikes bombarding Gaza City is to drive Hamas into the tunnels. Mm-hmm. Okay. Then they're coming in with tanks and other ground vehicles to isolate the city, allow like whatever civilians they can to get out. But then once Hamas is in the tunnels, now they're preparing to go in for the urban assault, root them out of their tunnels, and kill everybody in Hamas. That's the idea right now. of course, it has come at the cost of now over 8,000 civilian lives in Gaza.
When the urban assault starts happening, that number is going to skyrocket.
Yeah,
You know, like when the soldiers actually enter the city, that number is going to go up very, very, very fast.
true. Because Hamas also uses the civilian presence to their advantage.
No
and they're
doubt.
completely okay using the civilians as human shields.
There was an interview with a Hamas leadership, and he was asked directly why Hamas doesn't do more to, protect the lives of the people. And he says, and the Hamas official says that that's the job of the UN, not the job of Hamas. Hamas does not care about protecting the lives of the Palestinian people at all. Yeah. They have no interest in that. Their only interest is killing Jews and destroying the state of Israel. They have no interest in helping the people of Palestine. They are tools of their political goal, not people to be taken care of for them.
Yeah, which is
so
extremely sickening.
We'll be criticizing Israel a lot through this, but there is never any point where we're saying that Hamas is okay and cool.
No, they're both horrible.
Both terrible.
Like, that is what is more and more clear.
Yes.
And part of that on the Israel side is that Netanyahu categorically rejected the idea of a ceasefire and said that Western allies, people calling for a ceasefire, are basically saying they want Israel to surrender to Hamas, which is a false equivocation if I've ever heard one.
No, we're not asking you to...
Absolutely ridiculous. The idea that the retaliation hasn't already been way overblown for the Hamas attack. And again, the Hamas attack was absolutely horrible and just a ridiculous scale of violence against almost entirely civilians. And yet what Israel has done is over 5 times that amount of death in Gaza.
And the amount of the infrastructure that's been destroyed. We're talking 25% of homes.
Yeah.
Gone. Just gone. Where are those people going to go? Where do they go?
No.
And then on top of this, so you destroy all these people's homes, so they go into refugee camps. And then today, we have an Israeli officer on CNN openly admitting that they bombed a refugee facility, killing tens of civilians.
Yeah.
Oh, some estimate it to be 100, but that's the Hamas number. I'm not going to say it's 100 because I don't trust the Hamas number, but at least tens of civilians. And the Israeli officer was like, yeah, we killed one Hamas official in that bombing.
Yeah.
And then Wolf Blitzer's like, okay, but you did bomb a refugee facility and killed tens of civilians. Like, you know that. He's like, that's the price of war. Like, this is fucked up.
Yeah. It's completely fucked up. And it is completely fucked up on both sides because, again, the Hamas agents locate themselves there
Of course.
purposely so that they can make Israel look bad. But that doesn't mean that it's okay for Israel to do the thing that makes them look bad.
No, it's still not right. That's not how you operate in rules of war.
No.
That's not how a democracy is supposed to fight wars, okay? Now, look, the United States has done terrible, awful things in Iraq, did terrible, awful things in Iraq, did terrible, awful things in Afghanistan. But that doesn't give carte blanche for me as an American to say, okay, my country did it, I guess all you guys could do it too. No, we have to make our country better, and we have to make all other countries better.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I'm
Totally.
allowed to say my country has flaws, so I'm going to also criticize your country when it does the same flaw, right? As long as I'm criticizing my own country when it happens, which we do.
Yes.
So let's move on to the political fight that's going on in the United States right now in regards to aid for Israel. So Biden proposed a joint funding defense bill for funding for Ukraine, funding for Taiwan, funding for Israel, funding for the border of the United States. Now, McConnell likes this approach. Mitch McConnell's on board with this, but progressives and hard right-wingers don't like it. Progressives don't like it because they want to fund the Ukraine aid, but don't want to fund the Israeli aid. That's talking about Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, probably AOC, maybe Sorta. She's probably still up in the air on that. But now, with the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who has indicated that he's for Ukraine aid, he has said that. He has also indicated that he's for Israeli aid. But Mike Johnson has proposed to separate the bills and only bring an Israeli funding bill to the floor in the coming days for $14 billion. But the caveat is he wants a pay-for in it. That's fine. How are you going to pay for it? He wants to reduce the funding for the IRS by $14 billion. Oh my God. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean when you want to reduce the IRS funding for $14 billion? We've talked on this show before about how IRS funding is extremely efficient at capturing more money entering the federal, the treasure chest there. All right. It's very, very effective at bringing more money into the purse. And it's all about capturing money that is already due to the United States.
Yeah.
But tax cheats are just getting away with it. Right. So by rescinding $14 billion, that will limit the IRS's ability to enforce current tax law, limit operational support, eliminate the free file for taxpayers. So this is a really big deal. Every tax season, a lot of working class Americans have to pay TurboTax or have to pay H&R Block to do their taxes for them. The IRS is currently working on, with the new money that Biden appropriated through the Inflation Reduction Act, I'll mind you, they're working on a free e-file system. So every American can just log on to the IRS web portal, click a few buttons, and bop, 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 you've done your taxes. All free, no cost to you. IRS has got you covered.
Yeah.
And the Republicans want to eliminate that. They want to make your life harder. They want to eliminate operational support.
That's great. This can save like $50 a year for every family.
Literally every single family in America, right? And it's just because... And so in addition to this, right, it's a pay for. He's saying we'll take away $14 billion from the IRS and then we'll give it to Israel. Well, the Congressional Budget Office would score this bill as increasing the deficit, because reducing the IRS budget by $14 billion means you're not capturing as much of the revenue that you should be capturing from those high-income individuals. We've talked about this before. High-income individuals have their assets in a lot of different places, and it makes their tax filings very, very complicated. It makes it hard for the IRS to audit them. Well, with the new money from the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRS has been able to crack down on tax cheats and has targeted 1,200 specific millionaires that they're going after to get more money from them. Mike Johnson doesn't want millionaires to pay their taxes, but he wants every firefighter to pay his taxes. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Is that the Republican platform? It blows my mind that people don't see through this, that it's just absolutely blatant BS. And it blows my mind. And so, like, now what are we talking about? We talk so much, the Republicans talk so much about how Democrats don't support Israel enough. You're the ones who are trying to make this a political fight about domestic policy.
Yeah.
Democrats are out here saying, yeah, we'll do the $14 billion for Israel. We'll do you one better. We'll save every democracy across the world. We'll fund the defense of everyone. You know, we'll even put more money towards the border. But then he's like, no, reduce the IRS, make it easier for millionaires to avoid their taxes, and then maybe we'll give money to Israel. I mean, it's insane to me that they have somehow captured the right to say that they're the pro-Israel party when they do stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it is hard for me to wrap my head around. It seems to harken back to the very fundamental neoliberal ideology of, or neoliberal, neoconservative of, we are very involved abroad. We are massively militarily invested in our allies, right? And that feels very Reagan-esque.
Sure.
But it's just not the reality anymore. So.
And it's insane. All right. Now, there's a reason we saved that story for last.
Yes.
Our deep dive today is all about tax evasion and why you should do it. No, I'm just kidding.
This is a 5-step plan on how to evade your taxes. No.
Quite the opposite. We're going to be talking about what governments could do to stop BS millionaire tax cheats.
Yes, to raise tax revenue at a time when really we need it almost unlike any other, right?
With the deficits that we've created through COVID.
Yeah.
And with the stimulus that governments across the world has had to funnel into economies and the fiscal packages they had to pass in order to keep us all afloat, we need a better way to raise revenue.
And the challenges that we now face with specifically the fight against climate change, right? And that's something that this report... So when we first started this podcast, in probably our first 5 to 10 episodes, we read a book by someone named Joseph Stiglitz, who used to be, I think it was Secretary of the Treasury to Obama, or maybe to Clinton. I don't know.
I think it was Obama.
Okay. And this report caught Anthony's eye because this man, Joseph Stiglitz, he wrote the foreword to the report.
It's crazy to me. It's so funny that all came together.
Yeah.
Randomly, Ben had that book on his coffee table, and he's like, hey, you want to start this podcast where we read this book and talk about it? And now here we are, half a year later, and I found this random report of that author. Uber famous.
Yeah. And this report is the first of its kind. It's called the 2024 Global Tax Evasion Report. It's out of the EU, actually. What is the EU agency? If I scroll to the top here, the EU Tax Observatory put this together. And it's coordinated by a bunch of the leading tax evasion experts. Stiglitz wrote the foreword. It's really cool because as you read it, it's so many of these ideas connect back to the things that he laid out in the book that we read. It kind of feels like these people who are putting together this report and the people that have done this research have, like, they feel like they're following in his footsteps and continuing his work. So that's really
super
cool.
true. That's super true.
Yeah. Okay. So first, I want to do the big picture. What does tax evasion look like? There's a bunch of different ways it's done. And what is the state of it now? So for a long time, so there are a bunch of different ways taxes are evaded. One of them is offshore wealth. That's one of the biggest ones. From about up until 2017, it was estimated that up to 90 or 95% of offshore financial wealth went unreported and thus untaxed. Right?
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And this, fortunately, has actually changed because since 2017 and 2018, there have been big advances in how this wealth is reported. There's now automatic sending of financial information about accounts managed by financial institutions of a country where some offshore wealth is held to the country of the holder's residence. Mm-hmm. So that has made this form of evasion much less common today. We're going to get much more into that. But this comes under these two major paradigm shifts that happened in the 2010s. The first one was, proudly enough, led by the U.S. It was called the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act.
Yes. Now, this was spawned out of the Great Recession, right? This was when we're passing Dodd-Frank, that piece of legislation. We're regulating our banks again as much as we did. We should have done more, but it is what it is. We passed the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. And this federal law requires all non-U.S. foreign financial institutions to search their records for customers with indicates that they might have a connection to the United States. Mm-hmm. Now, estimates at the time said that it would produce $8.7 billion in tax revenue over 11 years. Later estimates revised that number down to $3 billion, but it's all very, very up in the air, and it's hard to measure how much money that it would actually take in. It's very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. But what we do know is that since the enactment of FATCA, the IRS has received approximately $8 billion from the FBAR penalties. Now, the FBAR penalties are penalties on banks for not reporting the person who they indicate might be tied to the United States. Mm-hmm. So they're not capturing, it looks like they're not capturing the revenue from the people directly. They're capturing the money from the banks who shouldn't be holding the people's money to begin with.
Yeah.
That's what's happening.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. This has proved to be a large cost for foreign businesses and banks. There's no doubt about that. There has been a boon to consulting and business services companies since its passing, because now these banks need people to scroll through their records and find people who have ties to the United States. So they need more consulting agencies to do that they don't have the time to do in their in-house. Now, Republicans have proposed to reject this bill in 2017, repeal it completely. Some Democrats, this is really funny. Democrats who live abroad apparently has its own coalition. It's like its own voting bloc, and they have their own organization, and they came out against it, which is just so messed up. Yeah. It's like Democrats abroad for tax cheats. And it's like, because you're the ones cheating on your taxes.
Yeah.
It's nuts. U.S. investors with hidden offshore assets moved assets to other countries that have provided secrecy and has enabled these investors to continue to evade U.S. tax liabilities. So what's happening here is there's been a little bit more of a crackdown specifically since 2014, because that is when the Swiss government signed on to assist the United States with FATCA. So 2014 is a switch moment where now the Swiss banks are now working with the United States as well. So what we've seen is that approximately $300 million a year is being generated from the FATCA taxes. Now, with $300 million a year for the FATCA taxes, that comes in under the $700 million that was expected. But if you include the FBAR penalties, now you're above the estimation of the money we expected to bring in.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what went on with FATCA, and that started this move of bringing in that offshore money.
Yes. Finally, so a country had started to hold other countries accountable for the offshore holdings of their residents, and the U.S. started that. And then the EU followed suit with what is called the Common Reporting Standard, the CRS of the OECD. And the CRS went a step further because FATCA was focused on income streams that U.S. citizens accumulated offshore. But the CRS not only included income streams, but also wealth. So it looked at the sizes of bank accounts and of security holdings, stuff like that. This mismatch causes a little bit of a problem now, and one of the suggestions of the report is that the U.S. should get onto the CRS because the U.S. still says we have FATCA, so we're good enough. I'm going to get into that later. Mm-hmm. But some evidence of how big of an issue this was before 2017, 2010, before any of this came into play, there was very, very little offshore wealth reported even at all before these systems were in place. Less than $1 trillion, which sounds like a lot, but when you compare it to the 12.6 trillion that was reported in offshore wealth in 2022, that's almost nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
So we've made big strides, but this issue hasn't disappeared. Some offshore financial institutions don't comply with CRS because they face no real threat from foreign authorities. And so what you can think about here is a Swiss bank doesn't necessarily, even though they are required by law to report the holdings of Americans to the U.S., their U.S. tax collectors or tax authorities aren't really going to come and punish these Swiss banks in any way. They can't do much in that vein. So even though, because the system is in place, there is more automatic communication happening because these banks don't want to necessarily be openly defying international law, they still can do it without significant enforcement.
Right. And those FBAR penalties now become a cost-benefit analysis for these banks,
yep,
where the banks decide, okay, you know what, it actually costs me more money to get all these guys, send their information over to the U.S. so they can get taxed. I'll actually save money by avoiding all that work and just paying the penalty.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's more work to do there. We will get into that more later on as well. But I want to get into, or I guess this will, yeah, I'll get into this a little bit more now. I took these notes fairly rapidly over the past few days, so it might be a little all over the place, and hold me accountable if you
okay.
So a large body of research has shown that without the kind of automatic reporting that was encouraged by FATCA, that was mandated by the CRS from the EU, that there is widespread tax evasion. And I was really curious how this trend started. It started in Switzerland with the rise of Nazi Germany because
classic,
as these these far right movements were starting to take hold in Germany, and they were like in Italy and in other countries, right? They were still happening. You didn't know whether they were going to win or not. One of the things that Nazi Germany did very early on was freeze the accounts of the Jewish citizens there. So these people who had families that had built up enormous amounts of wealth needed somewhere safe to hide it, that they knew where they knew it wouldn't be reported to the Nazis. And Switzerland was like, we got you. We'll hold on to that.
Wow.
Okay.
That's a really nice start to something that becomes so evil.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that's the case a lot of the time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So this report has a methodology that estimates that $12 trillion of wealth, which is equivalent to 12% of global GDP, was held offshore by households at the end of 2022.
That is so much assets that are not being appropriately taxed or appropriately monitored.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot of them are appropriately taxed, but it's not appropriately monitored. And it's hard for us to even measure if they are getting taxed correctly at that point.
Yeah, it is. Interestingly, though, the increased transparency of these automatic bank information sending or these transfers doesn't seem to have affected the amount of wealth held offshore as a percentage of GDP, meaning tax evasion probably isn't the main reason for offshore holding, even though we know it is a mechanism for those ends when people want it to be.
Right. Offshore holding makes it easier to cheat off your taxes, but that doesn't mean that people always have offshore wealth to cheat on their taxes.
Yes.
It's just like it seems to be a very, very nice byproduct of that arrangement. But because of the way they're operating their businesses, they still need those offshore assets.
Yes. There's also other types of assets that people can hold offshore, and I'll get into this later, like real estate, that aren't tracked by these systems, right? These are they're really focused on just financial wealth with FATCA and with CRS. So they have these other ways to evade. Over the past 20 years, a lot of this, interestingly, has shifted away from places like European offshore centers in Switzerland and towards Asian offshore centers like Hong Kong and Singapore, which was interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, Switzerland goes on a massive decline of their share of financial services and offshore holdings from 2005. And the real reason for this that I found was wealth creation is just happening faster in the East. And money that is created in the East tends to stay in the East. If people become rich in China, they tend to keep their money in China. That's what seems to be happening. And it seems that the Asian bloc is now where most GDP is happening, GDP growth is happening, where most wealth creation is happening, and it seems to be where most offshore wealth is getting stored. So Boston Consulting Group forecasts that the wealth of the richest people in the world will swell from 460 trillion to 600 trillion by 2027. And this rate of new wealth is specifically coming from Asia and the Middle East. Very much will overtake the West in the coming couple years, 4 years, completely overlap the West.
Yeah.
In Singapore, the number of single-family offices that provide wealth management has jumped nearly threefold since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this is being driven by an influx of wealthy Chinese families.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. In addition to this, Sweden has also faced some troubles with the collapse of Credit Suisse, a very big Swiss bank. With that going down, Russian sanctions actually hurt Switzerland in regards to this. So that's why Switzerland has kind of lost a lot of its market share in the financial industry.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And offshore wealth, part of why it's so important. So as progressives, as liberals, we are interested in progressive taxation rather than regressive taxation, right? Which means we think that the rich should pay a higher percentage on their taxes than poor people because they're more able to. And so offshore wealth is really important for this particular point because evidence shows that the individuals who hold offshore wealth are heavily concentrated at the top of the wealth income distribution. They think that about half of offshore wealth was held by the top 0.01% in 2022.
What a shocker, right? I mean, how many people do you know that have offshore wealth?
Yeah, exactly. But that is just crazy. Like half, 50% of it by 1/100th of 1%. That's crazy to me.
God, that's so much money that is just not getting taxed appropriately, which is such a shame because it makes your taxes higher.
Yes.
It makes your taxes higher when we can't capture their taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. And it drives us further into a deficit, and it's brutal.
It's just bad.
So we talked about the automatic exchange of information. I want to talk about where the gap still lies. Before, the estimate was that 90 to 95% of offshore wealth was going untaxed. Still, we estimate that 27%, maybe a little bit more than 27%, is going untaxed. Why this is a few reasons. One is the idea of non-compliance by banks. So there was a case of Credit Suisse misreporting U.S. citizenship of account holders or wiring undeclared funds to other banks of their U.S. citizen account holders without notifying the Department of Justice, which it was required to do after it was sued by DOJ in 2007 for helping citizens evade taxes.
Wow.
So these companies, these banks can misreport the owners to help them avoid that. Foreign people can use shell banks, and this one's really interesting to me. Foreign financial institutions don't have to report on their accounts that are held by other financial institutions. So like one person, one billionaire can start a shell company, a shell bank, and hold money in that shell bank to evade taxes, because now the wealth, the offshore wealth in that shell bank doesn't have to be reported. Or the offshore bank that shell bank holds in another bank doesn't have to be reported.
Got it.
Yeah.
Wow,
Which is so complex.
God, what a bitch that does that.
I know. The length that these people go, I just spat everywhere.
I wish it was on his face. Jeff Bezos' face.
Yeah. One other thing, crazy thing that I never would have known about. There are these things called citizen by investment programs, which basically means you pay a certain amount and you're automatically a citizen of the country.
Sure.
Yeah, like the Cayman Islands has a program like this, right? Say Shell has a program like this, the British Virgin Islands. All of these tax havens, these obvious tax havens, have these citizen by investment programs. So the country that are offering the citizenship can opt not to receive information from other countries, and then it's never known like how much offshore wealth these people have, or isn't traveling through the CRS channels.
Unbelievable.
Right? It's wild. It's wild. There's also people can get around it because of different reporting thresholds, where accounts under $250,000 aren't required to be reported, and sometimes ownership stakes under 25% aren't required to be reported. So you can just have 8 of your family members as owners of millions of dollars in offshore wealth. And since you split it between all of them, it doesn't have to be reported.
That sounds like a Succession plot.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
No, it's crazy to me, because these are the types of avenues that billionaires go through to avoid paying taxes. And it's insane to me, because now billionaires have an effective tax rate of around 0 to 0.5% of their wealth.
Yeah.
That's what their effective tax rate is. And it's because of the frequent using of these shell companies that you're talking about, that they're able to avoid so much of their taxes. So think about that, 0 to 0.5% of their wealth they pay in taxes. If you're watching this, you pay more of a percent than that, guaranteed 100%.
Yeah.
Is it fair that a billionaire pays less of a percentage of taxes than you? Is that right? Is that just? Is that good for our economy?
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
God,
it's
no.
terrible for the economy.
God, it's so bad.
Yeah.
So you should be angry about this. And this isn't about big government, small government. It's about good government here. And this is just about enforcing the laws that we have on the books. And in addition, making sure that we have a just economic distribution of resources that reflect who does the necessary work in this country.
Yes, exactly. It's not even a matter of like cracking down or reducing freedoms. It's just getting rid of loopholes. Right. That's kind of what this whole report is about.
Yeah.
It's how do we get rid of all these loopholes so the system actually works as it is intended to work?
As you voted for the lawmakers to go and write the laws to make it work like that, these billionaires say, I don't really give a shit about the laws that the U.S. citizens made. I'm going to not give them the money that they rightfully deserve. Yeah. And you should be angry at that.
Definitely. Okay, so I want to go a little bit deeper into the importance of offshore real estate. Which again, this is important because there has been significant wealth shifted into real estate since the advent of FATCA and the CRS because they only cover financial assets, right? Like your stock portfolios, your bank accounts. But offshore real estate ownership is large. The extent is unclear because of the commonality of indirect ownership through companies or trusts. But in 6 cities where there is data, 10%, $500 billion of the total real estate there is owned by foreigners.
Okay. That is insane. Those people, I mean, they're owning this real estate. They don't live there.
No.
We are in a housing crisis. We are short of housing in this country. And 10% of the buildings in these major cities are owned by foreign investors. Yeah. They're treating our housing stock, our communities, as speculation toys for their larger game of avoiding taxes.
Yes, of course. With pure incentives to just raise rents as high as they can constantly.
They don't even live there.
No, of course not. Yeah, so after CRS, there was evidence that showed that up to 25% of financial assets redirected from tax havens went to real estate to avoid it. And I think a really good example here is Dubai to show how easy it is to not report your real estate holdings offshore. There's good data, and 27% of the market is foreign owned. And one study focused specifically on Norwegian nationals found that only 66 out of 227 who had holdings in Dubai reported them, right? So that's almost 3/4 of these people who aren't paying taxes on the wealth that they hold in Dubai. It's a relatively small sample, but I have no reason to believe that those trends would differ at all in different situations.
No, it's insane. I read in there that evidence from the United Kingdom documents a substantial offshore ownership that constitutes 1.25% of residential properties, and increases to 15% when zooming in on the top end properties. So they're really just buying like the top end of these condos here, and then they're just keeping them empty, which is a larger problem with luxury housing generally. We have a massive problem like this in New York City, where a lot of these apartments that overlook Central Park are just sitting there empty.
Yeah.
And it's because that they're just investment tools. And so it's really nuts to see 1.25% of your entire residential stock being owned by foreigners who don't live there.
Just one country's foreigners.
Yeah.
Just one other country.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wild. But it's so common, right? Because so much of this is just owned by the billionaires.
Right.
I want to move on to profits and tax havens, which kind of has a few sides, but how do companies, specifically multinational companies, which operate in many different countries, how do they reduce their taxes by recording profits in countries with lower tax rates? So there's a few ways. One is intragroup transfer price manipulation, which, oh my God, when I describe this, it feels scummy to me. A subsidiary in a high tax country will buy from another subsidiary in a low tax country at an artificially high price. So let's say that Google has a subsidiary in France, which is a relatively high tax country, and it has another subsidiary in the Cayman Islands, which is a zero tax country. Basically, the French subsidiary will buy from the Cayman subsidiary, so all of the profit, all of the income is booked to the Caymans.
Oh my God, dude.
And so they'll set their companies up. It's so funny. I work at a multinational company, and I started to wonder, does this happen at my company? So they sell to they sell to the high tax countries.
They sell to the high tax country
buys from the low tax.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's one way. Companies locate IP in low tax countries and charge subsidiaries in high tax countries.
Wow.
Same type of thing. And the results of this are absolutely astounding to me. If you look at this graph, so I have it on, this is what, page 12 of our notes, and it shows the excess profitability of foreign firms in tax havens. So what this graph is showing is the pre-tax corporate profits as a percentage of compensation of employees of foreign firms versus local firms. In Puerto Rico, okay, which is separate for taxation purposes from the US, you see local firms with pre-tax corporate profits that are probably around 20% of the employee compensation. The foreign firms have that corporate profits at 1,400% of the compensation of employees.
That's
and so
amazing.
you have very similar looks from all of these other countries that are obvious tax havens: Ireland, Luxembourg, Hong Kong, Switzerland, Singapore. It's so blatant. They're just laughing in our faces with this. Okay, it's been estimated that 35% of foreign profits were shifted to tax havens, and that's equivalent to 6% of all global corporate profits.
That's unbelievable.
It's crazy.
It's insane to me that there isn't a larger political movement ready to crack down on this.
Yeah, which is why it's exciting that this report is out
Yes.
because this seems like the thing that's pushing for it. But the revenue loss from tax shifting equates to 10% of the tax revenue lost, right?
Yes.
It's 10% of corporate profits globally. And that's a huge deal.
Yes.
It's hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yes. So 10% of corporate tax revenues are lost because of this.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly.
The United States has done something to try to stop it. We passed inside of Donald Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. There actually was a mechanism in there to go after corporate tax cheats, and it seemed to have reduced the growth to around 10%. That's what I've seen.
Okay,
Right?
I didn't know if it was growing, or maybe there's just not even enough of a sample yet to know.
Well, because I have the chart here. I
Yeah,
don't
I'm
have it
seeing
on the
that.
notes. You see it? Okay.
Yeah.
So like the percent of corporate tax revenue that gets collected, of percent of global corporate tax revenue getting collected, is at around 10%. But it wasn't. Wait. Oh, no. This is the global corporate tax of revenue lost. This is lost. So the percent of corporate tax revenue getting lost has been growing significantly since the 80s. So 1% of our corporate taxes were lost in 1980.
Okay.
Now 10% of our corporate taxes are getting lost. It's increased by a multitude of 10.
Yeah.
Now, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act arguably kept it at 10. But that's where we're at now.
Okay. I thought I had read that the race to the bottom had just kind of continued.
The race to the bottom has continued, but does that necessarily mean that the percent?
No, not
No, right?
necessarily.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I'll just take your word for this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there have been policy things to happen. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act had one of them. There was also a tentative agreement on a global minimum corporate tax,
That would be great.
which was a huge deal. In October 2021, close to 140 countries and territories endorsed the principle of a global minimum tax of 15% of the profits of multinational companies. This is known as Pillar 2 of the OECD two-pillar solution to profit shifting. This is a landmark agreement. It's the first time there's an international agreement setting a floor to how low certain tax rates on profits can go. So this is like the best type of solution that we can have possible, right? People often argue against like a one world government. Well, taxation is one place where having one policy across the world is the best case scenario, because then no one has anywhere to go to evade taxes.
Right.
You have to pay the rate. And if you don't, then the IRS or whatever country's version of the IRS can come after you.
Yep.
There are also provisions in this proposal that would allow countries to tax the difference for activities in non-participant countries, right? So it's like if I'm an American headquartered company doing business in South Africa, and South Africa has the tax rate of 7% only, and it's below the 15% of the global minimum tax, the U.S. can tax the difference of the 8%. But the agreement is partially on hold because of opposition in the U.S. And I'm not super well informed on why this is, but I think partly it's because it will hurt the amount of foreign wealth being invested in the U.S., which has been an advantage for us recently. If this does go through, if we do get a 15% global corporate minimum tax, we're looking at increasing corporate tax revenue by $220 billion in 2023. That's awesome.
That's awesome.
That's exactly what we need.
If you couple that with global billionaires tax, 2% of a billionaire's wealth taxed every year, that would raise $250 billion in revenue.
Yeah.
If you combine both of those things to that's around $500 billion, that is enough to build the infrastructure in low-income countries to protect them from the worst of climate change and get them to a green economy.
Yes.
That's all. That's what we're talking about.
Exactly.
That's how much money we're talking about.
This is why this is so important. So important. But the crazy thing is, even so, this agreement, this Pillar 2 agreement, is weak. The 15% rate is a little low, and we're going to go into scenarios later on the differences in tax revenue that would come from raising that rate. But the bigger thing is there are loopholes to get you out of this 15% minimum based on percentages of tangible assets and payroll. So the idea there is the problem is the financialization, is the games. And if you're actually producing, if you're actually paying employees and producing tangible assets, then you're not part of the problem. So you should get exempt from the taxes. But the truth is, what the research has shown is the problem is that we continue to have this race to the bottom, and that it's not okay to say, okay, it's better to be in this country and to do your manufacturing here. The problem is that overall lower taxation leads to less output, more unemployment, and is going to make a less progressive economy, more inequality. And right now, because of this U.S. holdup, there's also a pause on the backstop for non-participant countries, which is really frustrating. The sum of these loopholes would mean that the tax revenue from the policy would be about cut in half, down to 110 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So
now the U.S. isn't alone in this. The U.S. doesn't have their hands clean here. The U.S. has passed some legislation, notably the Inflation Reduction Act, which has subsidized a large amount of investment into green energy. Now, this investment is done through tax credits. Some of it on the consumer side, which we love. Some of it on the corporate side, which isn't great, but I'm still glad it's happening. That's money that's going into the corporate sector is now finding that it will probably hurt overall egalitarian measures in the society. And if we don't tie those corporate tax credits to some type of egalitarian policy designed to redistribute the profits of these corporations that will get the money and the profits from public tax incentives, then we're going to start having a big problem.
Yes. So the good thing is that the IRA does have some provisions to mitigate those unequalizing effects, including giving more to companies that pay higher wages. That's exactly the type of policy that we need wrapped up in these credits. But these tax credits are also relevant to the 15% minimum because they'll kind of greenwash that minimum out. The 15% corporate minimum excludes what are called unrefundable, non-refundable tax credits. But all of the tax credits in the IRA are considered refundable. So they can kind of completely take a company's tax liability down past that 15 down to 5% or less.
Yeah.
This report estimates that green tax credits will amount to the equivalent of 15% of corporate tax revenue in the next decade. I'm personally expecting it to be higher than that because I think because uptake of tax credits in the IRA is unlimited. So it's just based on how much companies want to, how much they do the activities.
And it's already exceeding the thought of how much they would do it.
Yeah, exactly. So that is going to take away a big chunk of taxes that would be collected worldwide. So now I want to talk about more individuals, how they avoid taxes, who is avoiding taxes. And obviously it's the high net worth individuals. Not only are they the ones that are holding all the offshore wealth, but they have other tax evasion tactics that they tend to take. Interestingly, in most Western countries, you see relatively progressive taxation all the way up until you hit the billionaire class. And the drop-offs in, for example, France and the US look particularly stark.
It's insane.
So why do billionaires tend to have lower tax rates than other social groups? In France, the billionaires tend to be major shareholders of publicly listed dividend-paying companies. And so there is a tax that should be levied on those dividends, but they avoid income taxes from those dividends by owning shares indirectly, again, through a shell company. So instead, they pay the much lower corporate income tax on those dividends. They can also take advantage of a parent subsidiary loophole, which was meant to avoid double taxation, but in reality can enable no taxation, where they can own the stocks through a subsidiary, and then the income can go to the parent, and it kind of basically confuses the tax system, so it doesn't know who to tax and taxes no one instead. Companies in the US take advantage of this system by retaining all their earnings instead of paying dividends. So shareholders don't get any income and instead just borrow against their large portfolios.
And that's why stock buybacks are such a problem.
Yes.
Right? That's where the stock buyback thing is coming into play.
Totally. So now the question is, what policies can we put into place to fix these issues? First one falls into the category of building on the global corporate minimum tax. So we have this great idea that a bunch of countries have outwardly said we're on board with 15% global minimum tax. Well, the first one is let's remove these carve-outs for tangible assets and payroll that we just talked about, right? It's estimated that this would increase tax revenue by 20 to 25% in the short term and 10% in the long term. If we're estimating that that was $220 billion, we're talking about $22 billion per year from getting rid of these. The carve-outs are based on this idea of financial gamesmanship being the problem. That's not just the problem. The problem is the race to the bottom in tax rates, okay? Plus, raising the rate from 15% would be a huge deal. That would lead to an increase in revenue by a factor of, raising the rate from 15 to 20% would lead to an increase in revenue by a factor of 1.75. Increasing it from 15 to 25% triples the revenue. Increasing it to 30% nearly quadruples the revenue to almost $1 trillion per year.
Yeah, that's insane.
It's wild.
Now, this is great because we always talk about, okay, what's the downside of a corporate tax? Well, the downside of a corporate tax is that your company isn't going to want to do business in your country. Well, if we make it a global one, they'll have nowhere to go.
Exactly. It has to be global.
It has to be global.
Really.
And not just for the corporations, but also for the very rich.
Yes, absolutely. So that's the second idea here. Studies show the best way to identify the rich and tax them is wealth, because assets and liabilities are clearly defined and they're manipulated a lot less easily than income. The very rich can often decide just how much income they want to be paid by their assets in a year.
Very true.
Right. So billionaires pay around 0.5% of their wealth in income tax right now. The proposal is a minimum 2% wealth tax on billionaires. So that would also generate about the 250 billion number that you said earlier. The difficulties would come in valuing private businesses held by billionaires, but there are ways to do that still, where they're holding very large private businesses that could be compared to public businesses and valued based on those comparisons. There's another argument against this, that is that the billionaire's wealth is too illiquid to pay the wealth tax. But the only way that their wealth becomes that illiquid is if billionaires purposely organize it that way so that they don't have to pay as much in taxes. So by the same logic, they can do the exact opposite to be able to pay the tax.
And again, I always like to say this when we talk about wealth taxes like this. Your house is an illiquid asset, but you still get taxed on your property taxes every year based off of that illiquid asset. Why are the billionaires any different from you?
Yeah, exactly. Why should their offshore real estate be treated differently?
Yeah, insane.
If anything, it should obviously be taxed more because it's a much more extraneous, unnecessary asset for them to hold.
Exactly.
What about people moving to places with lower taxes? So we're saying obviously the ideal scenario is everyone implements the minimum tax, but there are many countries that won't want to because they enjoy benefits by being tax havens. So in lieu of that, we have a few different options. One is we can tax high wealth people who have been in the country for many years even after they leave, and credit any taxation in the destination country against that paid in the home country to prevent double taxation. So here's the idea, right? Someone spends 40 years in the US building their business, and then they want to retire to somewhere like Seychelles, which has 0% tax rate. They, based on how long they've stayed in the US, they will be taxed by the US a certain number of years. So if you've stayed there 40 years, maybe you're still taxed for 10 years after you leave the US. The reason this is effective is because people don't usually just start in a place like Seychelles and build massive amounts of wealth. They start in places like the US or France or Great Britain, places with higher tax rates.
Well, you know what it is? They use the intelligence of the Western countries. They use our institutions, they used our infrastructure, they use our people, and then the second they have to pay for the success that their country made possible to them, they dip.
Yeah.
And they decide, you know what, I have no civic obligation to assist the society that birthed my entire enterprise, which is insane.
Yeah, exactly. Again, they're just exploiting the system, which is set up for them.
Yeah.
That's why we need to change that system. It should not apply to people who are not very rich. Again, we want progressive taxation here. And it should be possible to enforce now because of automatic exchange of bank information. So we can more easily see how much people have made in different countries and how much they're being taxed so that they're not double taxed.
Yeah.
Besides that, we would want to implement minimum taxes absent global agreements, where a country with a higher minimum tax could also tax a proportion of the tax deficit of a multinational company. So the example is, let's say there's a company that's headquartered in the US that operates in South Africa. It earns $1 billion of profit in South Africa, $1 billion in the Caymans, and $1 billion in the US. The minimum tax in South Africa is 25%. So the tax deficit is $0 in South Africa. It's $250 million in the Caymans because the tax rate is 0% in the Caymans. And let's say the tax rate is 10% in the US. So the tax deficit is $100 million in the US. Then there's an idea that South Africa can tax this deficit, which would be about $350 million, at some percentage, which might be determined by, say, the percentage of sales done in South Africa. Basically, we need a mechanism that says if you do business in a high tax country and also in a low tax country, some of the business that you're doing in that low tax country can still be taxed based on the business you're doing in that high tax country.
And that's going to incentivize the low tax country to hike up their tax revenue, because that now what you're doing is you're making that company pay for higher taxes one way or another, right? There's no benefit for them operating in that low tax country anymore because they're going to get taxed on the deficit anyway. Yeah. And if that's going to be the case, you might as well capture the revenue that you're missing out on.
Exactly. And then you almost get a race for taxes to get a little bit higher. And that's
where you want to be.
Is where you want to be. And then the kind of final thing I have here is moving toward a global asset registry. So there are a few things that should happen here. One is the US joining the CRS, which I mentioned before. FATCA is good, but isn't great. And it introduces unnecessary complexity to have the two different systems. The US has held off for a while. It should buckle. It should give in, join the CRS. It'll help this entire system because it's such a big player. It's the biggest player.
Right. Any type of global arrangement like this that doesn't include the U.S. isn't really serious.
Exactly. The CRS needs to extend to cover real estate and other assets that it doesn't cover right now. The next frontier being cryptocurrency, which has seen its market cap explode from $20 billion to $1 trillion since 2017.
It's probably gone down since then, but that's all right.
Yeah, you're right. A little bit. This came out pretty recently, though.
Yeah, it did.
But generally, we just need as much information transparency as possible. We need to know, where is offshore wealth managed? Where do the owners of that wealth live? Who are the owners? How is the wealth distributed, right? Is it at the top of the distribution or closer to the bottom? What is the income generated by that wealth? What are the taxes collected on that income for the different countries? All of this we need to be more publicly available, more easy to access, so that we can determine who owes taxes, how much do they owe, in what countries do they owe the taxes to. At the moment, certain studies can gather this information, but only from individual countries, which have to sign on to the study being done with the information that they get from CRS. It should be publicly available. And then, so this data could be aggregated at a regional level and then up to a global level. And this would just be a crucial input in levying a minimum tax. We're just more behind than we should be as far as digitizing all of this information and congregating it into one database.
This is almost, it's like this stuff is the technology of the Stone Age right now.
Yes.
And it's because the private sector is efficient at making money.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the very, very best ways of making money is just not paying taxes. Yeah. That's a very, very efficient way of doing it.
Yeah.
They don't have to spend a lot of money to get around this, and they're always trying to be one step ahead in the technological race. We need to catch up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is just like we were just talking about with the IRS. This is just a fantastic investment to be making right now.
Absolutely.
Right. It's something where, yes, you are going to need more input up front or more investment up front. But the dividends are going to be enormous.
Enormous.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
You happy?
I'm happy.
I am too.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone. See ya.
Bye-bye.